Yes, thanks for joining this webinar. I'm really stoked that you're here. And in this webinar, I'll share some of the insights that I got while doing some CPI projects, and obviously also how you can make this better when you're implementing CPI. So my name is Daniel Gravers, and I've been doing SAP integration for 15 years. I'm an SAP mentor and a part of this mentor community, trying to give some feedback to SAP and about some of the different things that we see in the market that is going on. And then I guess we always talk about what's the big hobby and stuff like that. I think that's being a father, it definitely causes some challenges, but it's also pretty fun when you get a bit of sleep. But yes, the things I want to cover today is something about some of the lessons I learned with CPI, some of what I learned with API management, my short brief about what kind of training we have, and then I'll show you a tool that you can use so you can actually improve the CPI speed that you have. We'll get into those things that I see where it really makes sense to use an external tool like mine to handle some of these different things. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat. Hopefully you'll be able to write either to Taus. He will convey them to me if there's anything that strike us odd. So the first thing I wanted to share is a little about and obviously if you also want to talk, you can also mute or mark that you want to talk, and then we can have a conversation. But let's try to make a Q&A at the end. Hopefully we get time to do that. So one of the things I really loved, and when coming from a PI environment, was this kind of the flexibility that it allowed us to use. So one point we were doing an implementation, and then it's like, well, we want to have a special kind of logging for this. We want to report the data back, and it was like, oh, this is pretty difficult to get into this context and handling it in this way. And if we had been doing it in PI, it would not have been possible to suddenly send the responses to a different location. With this, we can just say, okay, we'll add an extra flow, send the data back to the SAP system with all the information that you needed, because we had all the data in the context that we're looking at, and it was just a matter of configuring this and sending it to the right location. And when I can see that this is also one of the things that makes the platform a lot better for more this agile development, where you're not really sure what is going to be at the end. Because if I were doing this in CPI or in PI, I would have to get the full diagram and know, do I need to use a BPM or not? It's not something you can just, well, you can add it at a later stage, but it generally becomes a little complicated. Here, it's just part of the process that you can do these kind of things. And one of the other challenges was that we're using the Advanco Salesforce adapter, and it had some limitations on using batch version 2, which is just like a CSV file that you could upload. And this was really, well, yeah, I guess going back to CSV is a little challenging, but it was what was working. But the Advanco adapter didn't support this, and it didn't support another encryption, that's the JVT token. So with with a small development in an iFlow, we're actually able to achieve this. So we could actually, without using an adapter or creating an adapter ourselves, we could handle this load ourselves. And that was kind of the flexibility that this gives us. And yeah, with PI, we could probably have done something in that context, but we'll probably end up creating some kind of adapter or some modules that could handle these different things. One of the other things, and this was also in this project where I learned, well, when we're creating a lot of code, we do see it as areas that is being duplicated, and when you're duplicating all of this code, it's pretty easy to so we had a scenario where we both had this batch upload too, and we had a scenario where we wanted to call a web service on the Salesforce platform, and when that ended up being two different approaches for handling this data, and we couldn't reuse it. But we found out that the login and the authentication we wanted to do was actually the same, so it made sense to take this approach and move it out. And then we could actually handle it a lot faster than if we were, and I guess it made it more agile. We were able to fetch the data out in a better way, so we can cache authentication tokens and stuff like that instead of having to look them up every time. So this saved, I guess, a couple of seconds every, or I don't know, 300 milliseconds every time we needed to do an authentication, and it turned probably out to be quite a few. But this was all the part of the refactoring. The ProcessDirect adapter enables a lot of these different things and makes it really useful to handle these things. Yeah, and then obviously figure out what are the common used functions, how do they work. The ProcessDirect adapter, this is one of the adapters I really enjoy the most. I was working, well, wanted to figure out how deep it actually worked. And one of the things that I found was that, yeah, Fibonacci numbers is a way that you can calculate a lot of recursive processes that would call itself again and again. And what I found was if I wanted to calculate Fibonacci 20, then you need to calculate Fibonacci 19 and 18, and then so it's really a recursive process that you would go through. And with this, I could see that when I called Fibonacci 20, I was able to actually call 20 concurrent processes with the BPM ProcessDirect. It was taking a lot of time, but there's a lot of processes that needed to be started and that you needed to cancel in the process. So I see it did support a lot of concurrent processes, and you can see the link to this and download this if you want to try it out. Do be careful about setting up the numbers to more than 20. I think 22 crashed on mine, but maybe that was some other problem. So definitely. And another thing I found was if I set the process to run in parallel instead of, so both run 19 and 18 in parallel, it would create a lot of different processes concurrently, and this would affect the performance, and it was, I don't know, many times slower than if I just said process one at a time. But obviously that depends on the system, and if you are doing that many concurrent processes, it's probably not okay. But at least it shows that you can pull these into a queue and run them a lot of times. The other things we found was this things about finding messages. And in this, we have the idea that a message and the ID for it is obviously searchable. The correlation ID also makes sense, and we were setting this when we were calling the CPI system from do muted. Oh, no. So in our HTTP header, we could set the correlation ID, and that meant that when we were calling data from the SAP system, we could actually use the same correlation ID to find it. And the link is also for this blog and is in the chat, so you should hopefully be able to see that. The other important feature was the application ID, and we could then, when we are getting data from the SAP or from Salesforce system, we are getting a batch job number, and we could then take this batch job number, put it in, and then we could actually search for these values. So you can, and it's pretty easy to set application ID, send on receiver. Send on receiver, we use them to register if there was any errors that we wanted to look into, or give some status about what was going on here. So that's a way you can override it a little and handling some of these requests. Obviously, you're probably seeing that there are some challenges with the monitoring application. You can only search for these the correlation ID, the application ID, and the message ID in the standard way. If you use the Odata filter, there's a lot of ways that you can also search for, or you can search for sender and receiver ID. So that, yeah, you can either add multiple flows in the standard monitor, but it's also challenging to add more user roles, give other users access to actually see some of these things and see what is going on. I'll just show you later how this can be done with our tool that makes this monitoring a lot easier. Change tracking and figure out what you actually have done was pretty difficult. During, I guess, the last half a year, they added SAP added the option so you could actually see all the previous versions, and you could then say, I want to roll back to version 1.0.8 or whatever, and then discard all these changes. But there's no way that you could actually go in and do comparison between these versions and see what was actually changed. It was also, so if you want to transport these things, you could either transport them as full packages, or you could then export individual iflows. And if you're doing it with individual iflows, you would have to go in, edit or delete that specific iflow, upload it again, and do the configuration for it. So it adds a lot of complexity to the process of handling these different things. And then documentation was also one of the challenges, and I ended up just creating some kind of a generic documentation that says these are the different flows that we have. I didn't go into details about explaining we have all of these different resources, this is how they work, these are how it's configured. Just stop this slide. Yeah. So, but I guess that's one of the things that also is important, that you can actually document what kind of resources is used in all of these scenarios. So you have this part about configuration in externalized configuration in the landscape, and this is really good if you want to have or when you have different systems that you need to connect to across the landscape. One of the things I did learn was it was best if, for instance, username, password, if you could keep all of these variables as similar as possible, because if you ended up having password that was called dev, QA, and production in the different environments. You had to go in manually and edit these flows across the landscape to handle these different things, and that made it a bit complicated to see what was going on there. So the fewer of these changes you can do, the better. But obviously, there's some of these that you want to do, and I think it's also a good idea to have the username as an externalized parameters, and this enables you to actually do configuration in the different landscapes, so you can actually see what is being changed. So here we have a process. This is calling success factor, querying employee data or employee picture and figure out who was what kind of pictures was uploaded the last time. And what I wanted to say with this is you have these kind of scheduled job and they need to run at some kind of a normal pace. But obviously they can fail, or something that an image you want to push again or something like that can occur. And what you need to figure out is how this will work. So what we did was we had this scheduled that ran, I think we ended up once every minute. Probably will change this. It will then found when was last run, set up a query, called this internal process, and here we had two kind of filters for the Odata. So if we were getting with the user ID, or if it was the last change date, and then it would do a split here and then process each individual request in this one. And then we had also an HTTP where you could enter a user ID, and it will then filter, call the same process with the user ID, and you would then be able to get the data into it. This made the process, well, a lot simpler to manage, because you would only have one way of handling these different things, and if you want to make changes to it, it's just one place. But obviously you could also handle this with the ProcessDirect adapter, and so you would call this with a ProcessDirect adapter. But I do like the approach about actually having it as in one place, that so when you're transporting it, it's just one thing that you needed to transport. I'll just briefly go over some of the API management lessons. So we also had API management, and we were exposing some Odata services at our backend, and it was really easy to get these kind of descriptions about what was going on in the process. So it could actually show what was the metadata that we had, and when it had the metadata, it could actually generate the full documentation of what kind of services we could call with this data. We did run into some challenges if the Odata was not configured, or the gateway service was not configured correctly. It would then go in and say, you cannot call this method, only head, and then it's obviously a bit of a problem. So there was some kind of caching that we needed to figure out how to avoid. The JavaScript, it's a little limited, and I guess in normal cases you would expect that you could Node.js modules or files or anything like that into it, but it's really a bit limited about what kind of JavaScripts that you could put into it. It did have some encryption algorithm, hashing algorithm that you could use, but no encryption in the library, so you just needed to find that library. But we were stuck at how we're actually adding the salt if the salt is a key, so we ended up creating our encryption in a different in an Azure environment instead of having here. This was regarding some of the logging we had. I think the easiest way to set up is you can use the Logly. There's some guides that actually show you how you can use this. So it needs to have a syslog service. Otherwise, you need an easy way with, for instance, an API key that you can call to save some of these data. And yeah, consider what you want to log when doing these things. You also have the KeyValue maps. These are the places that you would put in configuration across the landscapes that allow users to actually see what is being changed, and you can configure it across the landscape. And we use this one to save some error information in, so it was pretty easy for users to actually see some of these information. Transport, yeah, it was the little as the same as CPI. You could only transport one flow at a time, and that was pretty okay. We didn't have a problem with that. I think we had like four flows, but it's difficult to see what was the changes between these different versions that we had. There's an API that you can use to export this and set up some of your own configuration if you want to do that. Yes, so that was a little of some of my lessons regarding this. If you want to learn SAP CPI, I do have a training course, and you can see it here, and there's also coming a link here. There's there's a free introduction, and then there's also a real course that you can take. And compared to a lot of other locations, my focus has just been about giving you all the different tools that you need to build real ICOs. I will not go into details about all the different components because they are changing from time to time. But what's the main takeaway? How do we actually design your CPI flows? You also get some of my scripts and the success factor querying that I've created. This would actually allow you to query new employees in success factors, and we did run into some problems with this, and it's all described here. So it's pretty easy to actually get up and run. Yeah, so go check that out if you're looking for a CPI course. You can also find the link in the chat. And then I guess most of you will probably ask, how do we get access to trial this? It's unfortunately not possible, so the best way is actually to get to your customers or your client SAP system or CPI system, because that's where you'd actually get it. I have been trying to figure out how to get systems, but until now I haven't found one. So obviously some of the challenges during this process is how do we actually handle all of this operation, and I wanted to make a tool that actually make it a lot easier to do your CPI development, because in the process I did find some areas where I thought, well, there's room for improvement here. This is a little difficult actually monitoring these things, handling these things, and as we talked about, transporting these different things. So with this, you would actually be able to handle a lot of the things, logging, error handling, a lot simpler than if you're actually using the standard CPI and building all of these different things into the application. So Figaf IRT is the tool that we've created, and you've probably seen it. I've been talking about for the last 3 years. We started out just doing it for PI testing, but have since expanded to CPI testing, and now it's the full lifecycle support testing, transport, and yeah. So we're also creating more of this for PI. But I guess that would be a different topic. If that is something you'd like to see a little more of, I will probably create a webinar a little later on PI, because we're adding some cool things, is also regarding transports. So one of the main challenges is this thing about how do we actually monitor your CPI flows. And if you've probably seen this monitor, it's pretty limited what you can see. So you can see all your past I flows, what was being processed. You can drill down, but if you have to go through a lot of these and you want to check out these information also at the same time, it's not really possible. So we have created in the Figaf tool. So the Figaf tool is a Java application that you can either run on your own computer, a server, Docker image, or on our cloud instance. So we talk about this message monitor, and here what we have actually done is we've created a way that you can go into edit mode, select what are the iflows, what kind of search criteria do we want to have, what kind of iflows do we want to see also in this session. So we can actually add multiple iflows to it. So we just trigger this one. So, and we can then give you access to individual users on these data. Did I actually remove Fibonacci? It was understanding. Okay. And as you can see, we do have, we can search for these fields. We have the access to actually search for, so you can create a tile that a user can see, and you can then specify multiple different iflows that can run on this one. Let's see. Failed last week. So here we just have all the failed ones that we have. We can see them all and drill into them if we want. So that's, I guess it's because it's under the process of starting that we cannot see it. But we can see the error description here. We can see sender, receiver, and if you are adding more information for this, it makes it really easy to actually see what's going on in this this process. And then for each of these different tiles, you have the option to actually say this user should be able to see this this data. So that was one of the things that we added, and this is just all viewing data in the OData filter. Nothing is saved in the ERT application, and it's just leveraging the OData. So yeah, an easy overview. The other thing we have is the option actually to download messages and set up alerting. And alerting makes a lot of sense if you are getting some kind of alert that this message could not be delivered. There was an error in this file that you're mapping, but you don't want to fail the iflow, because then it could have consequences with other errors that's actually using this. So we had examples where we had from SuccessFactors, we had some users that had bad users ID, bad information, and we wanted to actually have a simple way we could extract this and give it, just create an attachment, give it to the user, say these are the ones that fails. So what we've done is we've created a support tool here, and here you can see you have the option to configure consumers. You can either say where the receiver equals log or where the status equals failed. And then in these, we can then see, okay, there was actually a rule triggered on this thing. We can see what this information was. This is something new we don't know what is yet, or we haven't defined a rule for. So we have the information, we have actually everything we need to know about this, so we can go and say, okay, this is not, we don't want to handle this. We can create some kind of a documentation that will describe a little about what we have done here and why we have done it. We can add a rule that says if we're getting this this kind of exception on this iFlow, we then have like it's a recursive list of XPath that will just run through, say, does the alert contain this? And maybe it's, if it is the specific iFlow, we want to say we can link data with XPath. So we can take alert time. We have just different labels we can add to it. So next time we would actually be able to filter them easier. And we can say what's the initial status of this. And if, for instance, we want to mute some of these for a period of time, we can say, okay, we don't want to see this error for the next 60 minutes. We have been informed that this occurs, but we don't want to deal with it. And obviously that depends on the different alerts that we have. We can send an email to a specific user, or we can send webhooks to some kind of a third-party solution that we have set up with Jira. So you can actually send it to Jira and get a Jira in task when something failed. So we can just test it. We can see what's being sent. So now we've created a new rule. So if this one fails again, we will be able to see it here. So the whole purpose of this is actually make it a lot easier to support the processing and figure out what's actually being done. And then based on these rules, it becomes a lot easier for our maintenance to actually handle these different things, because they can just go and check these alerts, or they will actually get the information from these rules, and they'll say, hey, this is what you need to do to resolve this. And this also works in the same way. No, you would not find this in this monitoring in the standard CPI tool. This is in the Figaf application that you'll be able to find this. There, you can create some iFlows that can extract these things, but if you want to set up some rules that says these are the different things, this is what I've found as the easiest approach to set this up. We also have the option to set up recent of these messages. So let me just see if I can. So we'll get some information. Obviously, they are in this log category, and in here we can see we have logged this information. We have access to the payload, so these are downloaded. We can view and edit these payloads. But we also have this one, and in this iFlow, we have added a small script, as you can see. Oh, see here. So this is this general iFlow where we're adding a prepare save, and then if we're getting an exception, we will then log the information into this. So it will be saved as an attachment if the process fails. Otherwise we'll not, because we could also log it up here if we wanted to, but it's just a matter of how much excellent can we put into the MPL database. So we just wanted to limit this and only send it where it makes sense. So what we can see here is we can see a notification was sent. We have now the option here to resend the specific message because we have this ERT sent. We can view and edit this this message that was being sent here. Let me just see. So we can see it, and we can then resend this message. And if we just look at our past hour, we can see we have now resent this this information, and it still fails because that is what's easiest with this flow. But I reckon that this also saves a lot of time in setting up these informations, handling them, because you get all of the relevant data in just one view here. And then if you're creating a rule with these different things, you also have the option actually to resend this specific message multiple times, and there's a way to handle that. It will not send it too many times. We also added a way, so it is obviously important to know if your CPI tenant is running, if there are any challenges with it, like CPU load, memory consumption, or something like that. We're not really sure about what all of these values mean yet and how they are affecting your productive cycle, but at least it's something that we can measure, and we can see all of these different data. And then you can actually trigger an alert that says in the next release that would say, okay, if the resource consumption of my CPI tenant is above 80% or something like that, we need to do something about it. Or if the latency becomes more than whatever 3 milliseconds here or 3 seconds here, then yeah, it's a way of being a little proactive, actually figuring out what's going on. Is the system up and running? And I would imagine that it would also be possible to actually calculate how many hours a month the system was down, so you can actually see if SAP is following their their SLAs. And here we can see for some reason I think that the value is capped at 80%, and this was when I was doing a Fibonacci calculation. So this is the monitor that you can see give some information about what's going on. And yeah, the GMS and database is also relevant things to put into this, so you can see how well these are performing. Obviously, well, some of the things that relating to integration is not just about doing the development, which is a lot faster in a lot of cases. It's all about the change management, actually being able to document what you have done, change it, transport it along the process. And this is what we have been working on, and creating a package around the full life cycle of what you have actually done with your CPI system. So we're trying to reach this DevOps, and obviously there's a lot of ideas about it, but in general it's about having a set of tools and process that allow you to actually transport between landscapes, test, run these things a lot faster than just having it as separate individual things that users are not able to handle. And so we start out with understanding what was actually being changed in a specific business requirement. Figure out what's changed. Is it a script? Is it a mapping? Is it the BPM model? Then we want to register this with a business reason and actually allow users to figure out what was actually being changed in this case. So I think I did a change just before. So we can synchronize this, and this will then handle the full or download all data from your repository as it looks of today, and you can then see all versions, all scripts, and we can see we've got a new one here. Hopefully that's the one I wanted to show you what was actually being changed. So we can sort by date, so we can see that we made a change to this one. If we drill into it, we can see the different versions that we have. We can compare it, and then this is one of the things we would need to drill a little deeper into. But what you would be able to see is that this new value has been changed to demo value. So it doesn't matter that much, but it's anyway important for us to know. And I guess there was actually a business requirement to do this. And we will then, so we can also see here the flow. We can see what are the components and the configuration of this. So we're also downloading configuration for all the iFlows that have configuration. We can then create a new ticket. And a ticket could be a service request. It could be a link to a Jira request, whatever kind of information you have. So now we have created a ticket for this. We have added our configuration of this. And what we can then do is we can also go in and configure this, what this should look like in the landscape. So we have our landscape we have defined, CPI, FSD. We can then say, okay, we got these two values in. Now we're just using the same one as QA, the same tenant, so it will just add a prefix to this. But obviously this would then be QA, this target host name. So we'll save it. So now we can go back to our ticket. And obviously this can be linked and run in different scenario. So what we'll do is we can test this. So we can look up if we have any test cases, which we don't. So we can create test case and make sure we can make this. We'll do that later if we have some time for it. But it is setting when we are doing this, we would set the data into trace mode, send a message in, use that as our new test case, and then we can actually send this into the system again. In trace mode, compare all the results, and then we would actually be able to see what the difference was in the full life cycle. And we can run it on multiple different systems. If we had assigned, we can also assign alert and say, okay, we got an alert. This is the reason why we're fixing this, and handle it. So we actually got full visibility into what was changed. So we'll create a new transport here. On our CPI tenant, it's this iFlow we want to add. And what we can then do is we can go in this transport, we can say import, and then it will import this individual iFlow into the production or this QA system. Because we're using it as virtual, it will just add a prefix to it. So it is now being configured. We can go in here. So it will then be called QA demo. Here we then have this iFlow. And if we look at, and see it's the current version, if we look at the configuration of this, hopefully we'll then see that the target host now is QA. So this makes it a lot easier to actually handle, run So you, instead of having to define this every time you do transport configuration, you can just define it once, and then it'll be propagated when you're working on these different things. Yes. So that's how we will do transports, and then obviously these tickets that we would then have is then updated with all this information that we can see. It's this iFlow we've created on this one, so we got full visibility of what is going on in the landscape. And we have created a way that you can document this, so you can create a ticket or export of what are the test cases that we have run for this scenario, for this transport, and get all of these actually reports. Maybe next slide works now. So here you got information about this this ticket, so we can see this is what we've done. What are the objects involved in this? When were they attached and configured? What are the test cases we had? If we have any test cases, we can see the status of these, how they're run, what the success rate was, and then we can see the transport when it was imported on a specific system. So this gives quite a lot of information that you otherwise would not be able to put, and then you can put this Excel report into your Jira, Solman, whatever system you have. I guess I need to speed up a little. Yeah, we can test it, transport it on reusable objects. We have a lot of the same transport management for API management. We also have a way that you can handle locking with the same tool. So we've used the transport mechanism to do locking in this, what's called the KVM. So we'll add iFlows and allow you to actually run these. And once they fail, it'll pull down the messages and set up rules for it. You can try it out at figaf.com/IRT cloud. Yeah, you can get a startup session to learn about how you can run it in your own landscape. And as I said before, we do have different options. This is our cloud only option, where we have a number of test cases. You have all of these different options. There's a full API that you can use to handle a lot of the processing, set up alerting, and handle it in a specific as you want. And we can also customize a plan for you, either that you can host on your own. So we think here, so you can run it on your own server, or you can run it in a container, or you can run it on, and if you run it on your own, you can also test PI and PO with it in the same way. So some of the things that we are working on at the moment is, or in the roadmap, is a way to understand if there was any messages that were missing. A documentation of the iFlow that will actually give you some kind of report that says this is the iFlow we have, this is what it looks like, this is the structure of it. So you have something to show, and it can also show you what are the changes that have occurred to the iFlow during the time, because we have logged all of these different business reasons. We're working on a way to set up load testing, so you can set a higher load on the system and see how this load test performs during some period of time. We are also working on a way to transport PI objects much the same way as you saw here. So instead of having to configure them manual, create manual steps when you're importing it, it will just be one interface you can define on QA. These are the values that we have on production. This is the values, and it will then check the CTS transports and validate once they've been imported. Do I need to do any processing on these? Do I need to run tests on it? And it will set up, configure them, test them, and hopefully it will see that everything is okay, and you can then get some kind of a report that says this is what's been done. And if there's anything else, we are also looking at different ways that we can improve this. So that's time for Q&A. If yeah, you have some questions, you can put them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and then I will unmute you. But yeah, you go to figaf.com/IRT cloud, or just /IRT if you want to download the on-premise version that you can run and try out on your own system. It's the same code that we're running in the different location. Obviously, some smaller tweaks to the licensing and how it works to make it easier or better to run some of these different things. Yes. Yes, I expect that this webinar, if the recording goes well, will be possible to download or view. Nak, I'll try to unmute you. Low hand. I cannot unmute you, Nak. I do make host allow record. No. Sorry, Nak. So if you dial in, I'm not sure how I can help you there. If you have any questions, do put them into the chat. And we can also do a Q&A session if you have more questions on some of these things and how you can let me know. You do have my email, so just hit reply to any of these messages that have come out, and I'll try to see if I can answer you or set up a time to talk with you on how these things could be implemented in your organization. Yeah, Figaf, you can install it on a local server. Right here, we're just using it and deployed it on our local PI system server. It runs on a separate VM or a separate image. You can actually run it on your laptop if you wanted to. And if you go to ERT Cloud, you can also run it on our application. We are using it's made in Java Spring, and we're using OpenUI5 for it. So we started out with SAP UI5, but last year, I guess, I don't know, a year ago, we moved to run it on a separate instance, on a separate application, instead of having to rely on running it on SAP, because there was a lot of challenges with running it and ensuring that we actually had a valid Java version. So I hope that answers the question. And if you're interested in seeing what we can do with transports, also ping me. We have a lot of things that we are working on to make that easier also for PI area. So, and if you're still here, and I guess we can do a demo of actually recording these things. So we would then go to our this package. So if we want to create a test case for it. So if you have any questions, do put them in. So we'll record messages. We'll record the next 2 messages being processed here. We'll create a new test case. For this, we will start this recording, and this will mean it will trigger the iFlow and move it into valid mode, trace mode, and we'll send 2 messages through. We can then pull these messages, and this will then download these specific messages that we have. So we can see what are the stages, how many messages it has downloaded. We can see it's now done, and we can see we have these data. So we can take and create a new test case on this. We can run this on one of our different systems, but now we just want to run here. So then it will send the same message in, and we can then view what the differences is. So now we're sending in the data. Before we'll just be processing this, we can also see all this data that we have, and we have a way that we can actually build a Groovy script. So we can create a Groovy script that looks like this message, so this makes it a lot easier to actually do Groovy scripting in the process. And so now I guess our testing result is done. We can then need to pull this. It also have a automated way to do it every number of minutes, but obviously for this case, doing demos, you want to do it instantaneously. So now we have done this, we can view the results here. So we can see that there was actually some errors in this. And for CPI, there's a lot of these different variables we haven't really figured out. But there was one here that is definitely, so this property time was different across these landscapes. So this makes it really simple just to see what is changed in the process, whether any changes, errors, or anything like that, and you got a full XML comparison view of these things. So if we ran it again, we would not see these kind of messages as errors in it. So that would simplify the process quite a bit. And then I can add this to my ticket. So here I can look up test cases. So why does that happen? Okay, there may be some challenges there. Most of the time it does work, but obviously doing online demos, that's where it would not work. Yes, if you have any questions, I'm still here, and you can put some questions into the chat.